This is Dave Monk, the Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign 90.1 on your FM dial. And
Dave on the board.
And we have guests that are watching because they're interns. As Iris is watching the board because she might be walking the board at some stage. And Joseph on the camera. And we've had some good feedback about the camera. People have been watching TV. You have to understand that we have a radio program, so we have to tell you so that you're radio listening or streaming. But then we take video copy with courtesy of Joseph and the Urbana, the public television, and that visual goes up on television and also streamed on as a television thing, and we can often add to it, and then that also goes up on YouTube. And there I was during the week being applauded for last week's, not last week's, it was a program that Iris was on, so it's getting some accolades, and I think that gives WEFT some publicity and gives Heartland Pathways and the Prairie Monk some publicity, and we appreciate all that. Well, let's run a little music here.
This is apropos of a gentleman who passed away this week. This is what we're jumping into. So we're going to hear a slow piece of pipe music here, and Dave is going to explain, apparently after we listen to this, why we're playing bagpipes at 11 in the morning on Sunday. Wake up, folks. So there we go.
And I every so often like to report on people who pass in their lives. And Jim Lynch passed this week at the ripe old age of 97. And he was a bagpiper, but he was also a professor of art. And so I'll say a little bit about that because it was kind of a fun farewell with people telling stories. And so Jim Lynch and Bill Briggs both lived on the west side of Champaign, and they would walk to work. Well, this got to be quite an event. Even his students, they're students, they're both art professors, and very popular art professors. They were not beyond giving very helpful critiques, so it wasn't always easy, but very helpful. And this pair both lived on the west side of Champaign and would walk to the art school together, but they would discuss everything from politics to anything that came to their mind. They were kind of humorists and would play with the linguistics so that they made jokes out of things and practical jokes and on each other, and their students, if they lived on the west side of Champaign, would actually join them sometimes. So Jim's son and Bill's son both said things about the family and the pair that walked to work. Bagpipes and partying were a good part of this. The parties would go on for a long time and into the morning. The children reported that they would go to bed, but they would listen to an increasing volume of music and dancing and carousing downstairs. No one really got drunk. It was just real fun, and that was reported on by X number of people that got up and said so. It was aided by whiskey and haggis, which is a Scottish event. Not everyone agreed with haggis, so it would come with something else, especially if you were German. You didn't necessarily believe in haggis. But the bagpipe part of this came from Scotland, and so there was a local group called the Morton Highlanders, and the Morton Highlanders were present, and later, as the cortege moved off from the rather historic old Owens Funeral Home down past Westside Park, they said farewell to the cortege, went off to Mausoleum in just south of the university, Mount Hope Cemetery, to be with a lot of people that Jim and others knew or have known and have contributed to this community. I'm just looking at my notes. I remembered asking Jim if he would come to a memorial service in Hinesborough, which is way down there by Arcola, and Jim was very generous in giving his bagpipe presence for any number of occasions, and he quite willingly said yes and came down and added character to the memorial service, which was an open-air service in the flatland around Hinesborough. That was to Anne Zanzi, and years later I asked him if he was still playing his pipes, and he said no. He lost enough breath it takes a lot of breath to play bagpipes, and he didn't have enough breath left. And his son actually said he died of congestive heart failure, which means he just didn't have that sort of energy. And but I was sitting next to Becky Hansen, and she said they played hand drums, and she had offered him a hand drum to play on just probably a matter of a few days ago, and he had indeed played on the drum. So he was active to the last moment. There were little things that were fun. Everyone wonders what's under the kilts, and it was, oh my gosh. And there was his waiter asked him if there was anything else he could that he needed, and he with a twinkle in his eye, he says, "It depends on what you're thinking of," and just little things like that are very much part of his spontaneity and his friendship, especially with Bill Briggs. He was a big man, tall, and his son Rick is tall, and his grandson Paul is tall, and his great-grandson, who was 7 or somewhere around that age, I would guess, spoke to great-grandfather, and I think he will also be a tall person. And Jim Lynch was a landscape artist, and he has a number of pictures in the cinema gallery. We actually asked him if we could use one of his pictures as part of publicity for Heartland Pathways, because it very nicely went down a landscape, down the prairie landscape across the bottomlands, and you could see the trestles on the bridges, and we still use that picture. He had been in World War II as a weather person in China, and so his clouds are very accurate and very interesting. So he's still around and in our minds. The son's name was, the great-grandson's name was Caleb. Probably goes back to Scottish background. I think that's probably enough there. We'll go on with some other things. There's lots of things happening this week. We often tend to do a report of what Monk was involved in, so it's been a busy, busy week. Let me see what I have here. Heartland Pathways. It's kind of interesting. There were two Smile Politely articles this week. One dealt with the Prairie Monk, an amazingly interesting article for the fact that Jessica Watson, who wrote the article, hadn't known me for that long. She came as a result of us having the candy dancer on, and he had recommended that she should talk to us. So that article dealt mainly with what we do around WEFT and around had several photographs. We even had a photograph of the carrots that I brought in a week or so ago. At the same time, there was an article about the Kickapoo Trail from CCDC, and we haven't been getting a lot of recognition there for the fact that we initiated that project. So there have been people along who know our long-term involvement, and we need to get some recognition there so that people who fund our initiation of things can help us continue that sort of thing. So they've been asking questions, and we've verified our involvement very positively by going to the Federal Transportation Department, which controls a Rail Banking Act. The Rail Banking Act we've explained, but it doesn't hurt to explain it again. It's a concern that there were too many railroads being abandoned, and the federal government decided that trail people were buying these beds. So to help the process and to save the beds, they saved the bridges, which usually are taken out at abandonment time. They quieted the title so you wouldn't have to go around somebody's property that was a reversionary title, and they gave money. So this trail is now a multi-million-dollar project, and money is coming from the surface transportation. The Forest Preserve and the Vermilion County Conservation District have bought the line, which is what they have to do. The federal government will not provide support money for the development of the trail unless you own the trail. So they bought the line, 600,000 one direction, 600,000 the other direction. The state is involved, and the state is involved partially because of their own input and the governor's input, but also because the federal interim trail use agreement provides enhancement money for the development of the trail. So That was announced just recently, and now CCDC and Banner Park District and others that have been supporting this, secondary to our taking out the agreement and between Conrail and ourselves and Surface Transportation, they decided this was a very good idea, and we just want to make sure that CCDC is aware of that start. Part of the problem is that people change, committees change, boards change, and people pass on. So we started this in 1996, so that's a while ago. But I've been to meetings, rail trail meetings, where it has taken at least 30 years to put these sorts of trails into action. It's a slow process. The next thing I did was I received a letter from Ameren, and this was announcing maintenance work, and we weren't told where or when or how. And I am seriously concerned about things like herbicide. We just had something like this happen between Seymour and White Heath, where we had bought 4 miles of railroad bed some 30 years ago for the prairie on it. And at that time, the railroads had been removing trees mainly mechanically. They did a little bit of herbiciding right alongside the railroad bed. But gradually over the years, the herbicide spraying has gotten to be 20 feet and 30 feet and 40 feet, and almost takes up the whole right-of-way. And this is a cocktail of 3 herbicides, and they don't get the grasses because they're not too worried about the grasses. So it's sort of a Roundup derivative herbiciding, but it's designed to take out trees for at least 3 years. For at least 3 years, the trees don't grow. So you bet your bottom dollar that the prairie doesn't grow either. And so when that happened, I was thoroughly mad. This is not only happening with the electrical power lines, it's happening with roads, it's happening with railroad lines, it's happening with farming. And often these herbicides, saving the cost of mechanical working of the ground, but wow, we have to drink that stuff, and it's everywhere, and often it's not tested, especially when it gets into a GMO and is a part of the plant. We don't always know what's going to happen in 30 years' time. We don't know what's going to happen to our brains when we grow 50 years older. And this is happening all around the world. It's not just Ameren here. So we've had the engineers come to have a look at our 4 miles, and we didn't get any really compensation for this. But we're watching. So when I get a letter from Ameren, I'm onto it right away. So I called up and got a response from Michelle Henderson, and that was very interesting. And so we talked for quite a while. That's very, very helpful, because often you don't get to talk to people about these things. It may be that if the construction is in action, you may be sitting on the side of a tractor or a bulldozer, having a staccato conversation with a driver that's also answering the cell phone at the same time. And so you don't have a chance to provide a background. And Michelle got to know that I was rather disappointed here, and so are many others. And she only controls certain power lines. Other groups own power lines which are parallel. And so We talked for quite a while, and then we met on Route 45, which is our prime prairie there is between Windsor Road and Curtis Road. It's 1 mile of prairie on the east side of the Neal Street, which goes into Dunlap. Dunlap being one of the early settlers in that general region, who was a horticulturist, and he lived at what was then Paradise Inn, which is still a motel, and he brought horticulturalists here. But he was also a politician, so he was the Republican whip in the State House. And so the street is designated Dunlap Avenue. And it's that area that we're very concerned about. And Michelle had been hearing from Chloe and others that want to burn that corridor. And that's a risk, because if you have a lot of carbon going into the area, it acts as a short from the power lines to the ground. So there's a move afoot all the time to remove the trees that might be a little higher and create a short, especially if there's burning. Well, 45 is a real problem. It has, excuse me, the road has been widened from 2 lanes, then to 3 lanes, then to 5 lanes. And that took a lot of the prairie. We moved that prairie partially to Lake Park and partially to the elements of the prairie that were a little depauperate. So we walked the area. Red Bison is in charge. There's a student group that's been there, and we realized all that there's a bridge across Windsor Road. There was no Windsor Road. The 7 jurisdictions locally wanted that road to be extended as a ring road around Champaign. So the railroad line crossed a arch brick bridge that brought the headwaters of the Ombra River down and through to the east and down by Yankee Ridge and eventually to the Wabash. That area was going to have to be changed. There was a big ditch on either side that fed small creeks into the main creek, and the bridge was going to have to be higher than the general railroad level. It had to go up 7 feet and across 25 feet. In order to put the material into the roadbed to raise the railroad up, there had to be tandem trucks going up there and dumping material. So that general area is disturbed. And trees, what we refer to as crud trees, have occupied that space. And they're tall. They're not that old, because we've been down there perpetually with chainsaws getting those trees out. But we worked that area. That's the major concern for Amarin. And they're sympathetic with the prairie interests, so we walked the prairie. The prairie has, on the roadside, a high concentration of grasses, and especially a high concentration of switchgrass. Switchgrass stays up over the winter, looks good, and has some ambience for traveling public. But it also has a lot of litter. Each season it drops its load of last season's fruiting bodies and the like, and you can walk over it and you sort of can feel it soft underneath with litter. Eventually that litter will rot. But let's go back to glaciation. Once glaciers retreated, you're in a landscape that's free of the calming effect of the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans. You're in the middle of the continent, and if you have a thunderstorm coming through, and if you have a tornado coming through, you can see the clouds twirling and sliding across each other, and that, by electrostatic nature, they make electricity, which eventually blows to the ground. And that is what the plants coming in after glaciation had to get used to. So they've had 10,000 years to do that. So they're well attuned to fire. In fact, they're totally dependent on fire. It's like you got used to something and then somebody took that element away. You have to know that these plants, most of them, not all of them, are very dependent on fire. So if you burn the switchgrass, it's actually going to burn better. So you have it's going to grow better because you're taking away the litter, the heat and the light gets into the plant earlier in the season. It grows taller. If you don't burn the switchgrass, it's going to accumulate litter and it's going to get sick and it's not going to be as healthy grass. So you have the dilemma of the litter spontaneously combusting with somebody putting a cigarette butt into it, or you have the possibility of burning it yourselves in a controlled burn, and actually it will grow better. So our answer to that is that you just don't put in that volume of switchgrass along the side of the road. You put in broadleafs and others. Oh, so we talked about this, and we walked it, and you could know that you were walking on a lot of litter. Actually, the Department of Transportation garages at North Market Street had come down and mown the litter. We had hoped to burn that, but sometimes the seasons don't actually help you. You have a small window that you can burn in between spring and once the animals come out and start to have they come out of their hibernaculums and places where they overwinter, and then they start to breed. So if you leave it too late into March, they're going to you're going to destroy those creatures. So you can't always do it because the weather sometimes just doesn't help. Right now we have had winter, and the soil and the litter is too wet to burn. We don't always have to burn all of it, but this has been a heavy-duty winter. So we discussed those things, and the answer is that Ameren might bring chainsaws and help to remove some of those trees, and red bison will help, and other agencies might help too. It's not the world's greatest prairie, folks. It's what we have left, and so some groups, possibly Grand Prairie Friends included, are not so excited by this corridor, which has its weeds and its traffic and its litter that comes from the traffic, and it's near to a Savoy village or Savoy Mall. It used to be Dick Burwash's family farm. It was a dairy farm. So it's grown in the last 30 years, that site, and that means that if you go to burn it, you have to have the wind blowing in the right direction, and the wind can be changed by traffic as it comes along, because a big semi-trailer can move the air. If you go past a semi driving on an expressway, you'll know that you've been past a semi because it has a trail of wind following it. And that truck is having to push through the air. So can we burn this? Yes, we can burn it. Basically, we want the trees out, so we need Mike Zerber, who is often a disc jockey on WEFT, has been down there regularly cutting out the trees, so that the growth is only small trees. So they should go, and they should be herbicided with a herbicide that goes onto the base of the tree, not blanket spraying. Thank you. So we're talking about that, and sometimes Amaranth can come with a huge mower, which is a rotary mower like a bush hog, only it's bigger, and it can take down a 3-inch tree if necessary. But this area on the edge of Windsor Road is rather hilly, so that sort of equipment is like to roll over if you're not very careful. So I think the answer is no, we won't do that. We'll do chainsaw, but interestingly, Michelle Henderson lives in Prairie Fields, which is a Savoy subdivision, and she lives on Buttercup. Other people live on Indigo. The names of the streets are Prairie Streets, so fairly interesting. And she's on the Zoning Board of Appeals for Savoy Village. So Michelle has several hats. She has a village hat as well as an Amaranth hat, but then she also is a student of forestry, and she has a forestry hat. So how do we work with all this? I found it a very productive conversation, and we know a whole bunch of people jointly, and we're hoping that this spring we'll get to burn that prairie. It hasn't been burned for about 10 years. So that was going on, and that was pleasing, very, very pleasing. We went up to Hillcrest and looked at the prairie behind the St. Mary's Cemetery, and we talked a little bit about the dangers of burning. You really have to have people who are educated as to burn, and you have to back burn, and you have to start off with very small pieces so that you know where the smoke is going, and the smoke can't be more than 15-mile-an-hour wind, so the smoke should be going away from the village, not across the village and across the road. And you don't want to have smoke stopping a semi-trailer and then a Datsun running into the back of the semi because it didn't see it and decapitating themselves. And that sort of thing can happen. So this is a very responsible job, and I think it's untoward for us that have been working with it for a long time to feel that some group like Red Bison could be expected to be responsible for this site. I think it needs more. So I've been talking to John Marlin, who's in the sustainability building, and John has been putting in a prairie over there on Florida Avenue near to the president's house, and so he's becoming very familiar with the prairie, and we'll help by giving pictures. And he was off the other day to go to talk to a wild group in Bloomington, and I think we need some senior people who are in perpetuity, more or less, in charge of that area. Okay. Hash Week. This week has been interesting. There's been a fashion show in Urbana, in the mall there, and all the dresses and artifacts. Oh, I think it was a fashion show. I didn't get to attend, but I did see one of the award-winning dress, which was made out of recycled zippers. Let me explain what the Hash Week is about. We have a rather innovative idea store, and it gathers up all sorts of things, including junk, that might be used by student artists. It's very successful. It sells us junk, and the contributions go to the school districts, and they get quite a lot of help from this. They run workshops where they teach kids to recognize interesting artifacts and use them in their artwork. They teach adults to do the same thing. They have volunteers to sell and work with the materials. They're all nicely lined up so that you can go poke around and not get too confused. It's not like just a junkyard. And once a year, they have a hash activities. The first one was the fashion show, where dresses and various artifacts are made from recycled materials. So I thought the one was it was done by Macmillan. I forget his first name, but so most of the materials come from the idea store. So they have been donated a whole bunch of zippers of different colors. So the dress length is all zippers. A little raunchy in a way, because you can imagine zipping up all these zippers. But Macmillan's wife was telling me that there was only really one functional zipper. They're not going to go up like that. But it was on a modern dress stand. The handbag that went with it was also partially made of zippers. And I thought it was very good, and that got an award from the fashion show. Well, the next thing is Indigo has a formal, or has had a formal art show of recycled materials. And wow, that was very good. And some of the leaders of the push there, Dennis Rowan has been a long-time art professor, and he often uses recycled material. So this is a show that's an art show, but all the materials are recycled materials. And often it tells where they came from. So some of the people that were there, other than Dennis, was a guy named Larry Angelo, comes from Indianapolis, and he had a boat made of all sorts of things, typewriter pieces. He finds things like contometers. Contometers were the early sort of computer that departments had to do their calculation on. And so they have little rollers and cogs and axles that can be put in. So he's made a ship out of these sorts of parts, and a very heavy-duty art recycler. Melissa Mitchell had, Melissa has also been a part of WEFT, and she's been a part of the journalism division of the university. She's retired now, but she puts together things from the idea store. And she had 3 pedestals with interesting pieces on them. One was a Barbie doll with just saying interesting things. So there was a rabbit head on it. The rabbit head could come from somewhere. There was a nest held in the hand, and there was a little bird in there. And, but Melissa is also an organizer, so she's helped to put together brochures and the like for that event. And she was closing it last night. The Indianapolis person was going up. So the third thing they had was, or the fourth, I forget the number, but it was a sale in Savoy, and this replaced last year's event was in the Y over here on Westside Park. Not quite big enough, and the Savoy Recreation Center is a recycled Methodist church. So they were into recycling there. And, okay. They have booths, and people come with basically recycled materials, and they can sell. But I walked in, and the first thing I saw was the people who weren't selling but were demonstrating. So there was Molly Scott with what she'd been doing with recycled materials, mainly fabrics, and she'd gone to Spurlock Museum and observed a nice pole with a light on outside Spurlock Museum, and that looked like a maypole. So she designed the ropes using a little old machine that makes, it's like a knitting machine, but it makes a rope-like materials, and you can include colors and whatnot. So she had people to wind and unwind around the maypole outside Spurlock Museum. So she had indications of this. Other people had taken plastic bottles and obviously junking material and made artwork out of them. Some of them had taken recycled paper. Instead of throwing it out into the bin, recycled paper, various colors, and nice displays. And there was the award winner from the dress show also. So I talked to Molly Scott for quite some time. Some of these people are people who live and work right around WEFT. Some of them are News Gazette employees. And so I got into the gymnasium and I talked to people. And in this case, I took pictures. And that would be very helpful to put some of these pictures up because I photographed Melissa Mitchell dressed in junk and carrying junk handbags and things like that. So I took enough photographs. Okay, that was not the end of it. I am very aware that Savoy has an elevator across the road. If you go to the airport, you'll see this elevator. The elevator is totally dead. We've taken over the area that is near to urban things, so that the people don't bring their grain there anymore, but it's totally functional. And I've been worried about this elevator because I think one of the things to do with it will be to take it down. But I could think it'd be a rather wonderful place. So, having had to do with Clarkson, I went to the computer and I will talk to Clarkson. Clarkson is an elevator controller, and he has something like 40 elevators, and he's non-GMO. So if you're, I can relate to a story that where a whole bunch of Japanese people were coming to buy grain, and the GMO people gave them their story, and they sat there and listened, but eventually they went to Clarkson elevators to get non-GMO material because they just don't like to eat GMOs that are part of the general genetics, but you don't know what's happening. It's but it increases the yield. So if you go to Monticello at the present time, Top Flight is putting in a new elevator. So what do you do with this sort of elevator? So I'm photographing and walking around, and I'm thinking that if the common market, which has done very well in Urbana, and wants to come to Champaign, that's okay. But the extension of the common market is to encourage farmers to do non-GMO. And there's about 7 or 8 elevator towers, and I'm wondering if the non-GMO people couldn't use this elevator for a non-GMO elevator.
We might point out, you're talking about the Common Ground, and now I've got your voice. The Common Ground Food Co-op is the common market that you're talking about.
Yes, and this is in Urbana. It used to be in Champaign at the IDF. The IDF Church, Illinois Disciples Foundation Church, encouraged this sort of thing. And so I'm thinking, and we've been down there. Maya Bauer has been in charge of the kitchen, so they put in the kitchen, a demonstration kitchen. And they wanted to also do art, so we've been down there with silkscreen prints to let people know that there are artists around, and so I was there for about 2 months while they worked out to put in glass cases, because if you're in a kitchen situation, there is also smoke, there's also fat, there's also salt, and if you have a fancy piece of watercolor, it's not going to stand up under that sort of atmosphere. There's also light, and you don't want ultraviolet light on something like a watercolor to blow the devil out of it. So this is experimental, and that's happened. So I'm indirectly talking to Maya and saying, what would you do artistically with these elevators? Could something like the co-op use the weighbridge, use the grain sampling house, and perhaps 1 or 2 elevators for grain as non-GMO. But what about the rest? Could you cut little holes in the elevator? Could you grow plants? Could you make a high-rise condominium out of this? Could it be artistic? Could it be artistic in a large way? Could we think large? Just as a way we thought about the railroad bed between here and Danville. Can you think that large? Can I encourage you out there? Can I encourage people to go down Dunlap Avenue and look at the elevator and say, okay, recycled church over there, nice prairie there, airport there, people coming into town. What could you do with this elevator? Could you have creepers, strawberry plants running down the side of the building? How would you do it? Where are the architects who could functionally reuse this elevator? Is there's open space? So could you actually sell from there on a certain day? So we encourage people to think about this sort of thing. Now, our problem is how to get that idea out into the public. Do you go to the village? It probably is thinking very much about tearing it down. We want to make suggestions. So I made a suggestion just recently that you could paint Budweiser signs on this building. So you would make it a pack of beer cans. Well, that didn't go down very big, but there are lots of other things you can do, and creative artists could probably paint those elevators. Now, there's a maintenance. It just doesn't happen that you can do this without having a future. You have to know that elevators, like any other building, can break down. If you're going to buy, borrow, beg, or steal such a site, you're going to have to be responsible. The wind and rain can't get into the little house that is used for weighing the grain. There's equipment. There's liability. What happens if somebody jumps out the window that you make and falls to the ground? So I'm sure it's something that it won't really happen, but I would like to think about it. So I'm encouraging some of you to go down 45 and look at the elevator and dream what you might be able to do with it. Could you have running water somewhere? A sculpted piece? There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot of traffic coming down Church Street that goes east and west on Church Street. It's right on the railroad line. So there the Amtrak is going past at 70 a mile an hour. So there's some sort of empathy to that. So I now know how to get that sort of information into the public. We can't do it too easily with radio. I am talking about it and giving you a concept of an elevator, but it's so much better. One picture says 1,000,000 words. So we have to take our interns that are sitting behind here and ask them how they can put this into a program so that it is actually a television program rather than a radio program. We have to do the same, perhaps, with the 25-mile railbed to Danville, which is also heavily involved in pictorial things. I even have had the thought that one day, when WEFT gets on its legs, that there might be a video division to WEFT. We have a building next door, and I've always wondered if that might not be a video studio. And I find other people thinking about that, and actually somebody approached me about buying that building for that sort of reason. And so how can I ask people to come out and study on a 25-mile railroad bed and to have concept drawings? Where would you put the trailhead? Is it near the Urbana Norfolk Southern Railroad yards? Will it be out there by Walmart? How does our rail trail relate to Walmart? I don't know. That's the sort of question we would like to ask. How do you interact with the road people who are likely to move the fiber optics cables and widen the road on their right-of-way right up to adjacent to the prairie, but then plant roadside plants that are invasive? How do we think about the fact that if a railroad came back in, where would the trail go? Would they put it down and destroy the prairie that's next door? How do we get these concepts into action, and how do we act as a prototype for other people to do the same sort of thing? Can this become a book? The Rail Trail Movement has just produced a book on trails adjacent to rails. And at a meeting recently, I asked how many acres of habitat that study would take out. And they sort of looked at me and said, well, we hadn't thought about that. But you have to think about this is the only place where there's any habitat left, and you're going to take it out for a trail. So does that push the bicyclists onto the roads? And the roads are numerous. We have roads, every section road. We have lots of roads. And Dave, you ride a bicycle, but sometimes riding a bicycle on Route 10 is not good. You get passed with a truck coming within 3 inches of your bicycle, and you need to then have a rear vision mirror, and you need to say something to the sanitary trucks that are taking things to Clinton 35 mile away, and they're moving fast, and they're heavy-duty trucks. So then you have to go up Kirby Avenue, which is parallel to Route 10 and is a little less traveled. So then you also need, there's always an argument between rail trail people and road people. The road bicyclists want to have a narrow-tired bicycle, and they want to go fast, and they want to do up to 120 mile a day. Not everyone does that, but they can do it. Tom Jacobs, who used to be here, and his Nancy have just ridden from San Diego to Florida. It took 45 days, but it was with bicycles that could go on the open road. Those bicycles don't do well on chip limestone that comes from local quarries and is a reasonable surface. So that means that people will put down asphalt. And surprisingly, people will put down concrete, because asphalt, you have to have a contractual crew come in and do the job. Concrete you can do yourself, and you can repair it yourself. If a tree gets underneath your concrete slab and lifts it up, you can get rid of the tree root and put down the slab. So it's not as soft. If you fall off your bicycle onto concrete, it's not going to be as gentle a fall as if you come onto asphalt or dirt or chip limestone. So
I beg to differ. I would just as soon fall on concrete as oil and chip on a road. Pieces of gravel is what you're talking about there, and if you consider that will not only poke you, but it could easily get stuck into your skin. So I'll take the concrete, thank you.
Okay, well, let me just tell you that chip limestone comes in various sizes. So that what they put onto the rail bed is usually not big enough that you have pieces of chips in it.
And again, I'm used to what you see when they go over the country roads around here with oil and chip. Eventually that gets worn down by traffic and things like that, but it's painful. In the meantime, you stay away from those roads
and
for the
that can happen because on the railroads, before they were closed out, often there was a derailment. And wherever there's a derailment, there's big limestone. And so you can be going at 15 mile an hour on your bicycle, narrow-tired bicycle, and you hit a bunch of exposed limestone, you're going to buckle your tire. And these are always controversial ideas. You have to talk about them. When we opened a trail at White Heath, I wondered why I was meeting bicycles at the other end. Bicycles didn't come through. When I eventually found out, somebody had put upturned roofing nails across the railroad bed, and all the bicycles had got punctures. It was just that some people didn't want the traffic of a trail, and they were objecting in that manner. So it's not always easy. And I think you were getting there. Let me just look at my notes to see what else we have here. Oh, I have been engineering some contacts in Australia, and that's been interesting. Well, I used to teach after teaching at Parkland College. I taught an artisanal landscape class, a team for it in Chicago. And so Lisa Stone is going to Australia as a part of the Art Institute, probably to investigate artwork there. Might be a donation or something like that. But I've got her in contact with my niece, and they will introduce her to Sydney. So just doing that in the context of Ethernet and just doing things in modern style, that's very interesting. So this has been Dave Monk of Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 91 on your FM dial.